meeting of the IGDA of Las Vegas. And we are honored to have as our guest speaker this evening, Phillip Moyer. Just a quick bit of background. Phillip and I first met when you were doing an article involving Dustin as well on the state of game development here in Las Vegas.
Yep. Yeah, I was actually reached out to by a PR person that was, well, specifically what they wanted to talk about was this online kind of meet and greet networking, sort of a GDC type conference that's entirely online. This was before everyone had to be online, so it was a completely different idea at the time than what it sounds like right now. But where it went from there, because I mean, it sounded like something, but I mean, at the time, the only place I had that would be able to take that article was a local news station that I was working for, well, still work for, KSNB TV. It's part of Sinclair Broadcast Group. So I asked if there was any sort of local element, anyone who is available locally that here in Las Vegas that would be able to talk about that. And so they put me in contact with Larry here. And Larry brought Dustin along because of a game that he's working on, the name of it,
the Tribbles game.
The Tribble Trouble game. Yeah. And so yeah, and it ended up, I mean, I still ended up mentioning the conference, but the main focus of it was more of a locally focused, here's what developers are, smaller developers that are here in town, how it is that they're hoping to be able to make it into what is currently an extremely crowded independent development scene. I mentioned the IGDA, and I went a lot into the Tribble Trouble game itself and the kind of fascinating story behind how the rights to that game came about. I mean, if I remember correctly, you were at a conference and somebody who
San Diego Comic-Con, actually.
Yeah, he was at Comic-Con. That's right. And yeah, sorry, it's been a while since I did that.
No worries. It's funny though how all of these things that happened a while ago now have a more contemporary resonance. So of course, San Diego Comic-Con was canceled for this year. Jay Powell, who's the person that did the original introduction, Jay Powell from the Powell Group, was certainly a thought leader in terms of having conferences that are 100% online and are more affordable for indies. So it's funny. We were way ahead of the curve back then. We also did a great article, one that I always come back to, a great interview for the Escapist.
Oh yes, the one about the
System Shock and the remake of that.
I'm sorry if I'm a little flat happy today. I had just been out walking in a few 100-degree heat for several hours doing a side job for the census. So I'm sorry if I'm not as entirely with it as I ought to be, but I'm here.
Not to worry, Phillip. It's the year 2020. If we're not wearing masks for this conference, then we're doing well for ourselves. So
all right. Well, I'm happy that computers are. There's no way to spread viruses on computers, but
right, except for those computer viruses.
Oh, there's that.
Must be a Mac user over there.
Nah. This is a little jalopy of a computer I threw together with whatever I could afford, honestly. But so I guess it's more disposable than anything.
That's right. Well, one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and this is really kind of germane with all the things that are going on today in the gaming world. First of all, I did want to add a point. We had talked about game development in Las Vegas and computer games, and particularly kind of competitive games. Governor Sisolak just awarded a significant grant through GOEM, which I believe stands for the Governor's Office of Economic Management, to a group that specializes in incubation to work with UNLV to develop a competitive esports program. So, in Las Vegas, we're moving into something new. But while that's cool, let's talk a little bit about some of the other things that are going on. This has certainly been a controversial year in the industry. Um, this has probably been most distinctively marked by the Me Too moment in the games industry.
Yes.
Companies like Ubisoft have come under fire. In previous years, we saw a lot of coverage about crunch time, how awful it is for people working on some of the biggest games, um, on the need for multiplayer games to constantly push out new content and to drive their developers to create that content nonstop. And let me speak this way. I guess I'm an executive in the games industry. Um, certainly have a directorship over at Night Dive Studios. Don't mean to put us on the same pedestal as an EA or an Activision or a Take Two, but we've done some pretty significant projects. Certainly, Doom 64 and the remake of Blood made people much more aware of what we do. But again, I'm a gaming executive. I guess by definition that kind of makes me one of the evil people, and I feel the need for someone to keep an eye on me, not me necessarily personally, but the people of my category, the directors, the vice presidents, the senior vice presidents at various companies, because without that oversight, we tend to go out of control. We tend to say, well, I don't care how long you have to spend at the office to do this. I need to make my numbers. And while I get that, the responsibility for watching us, for being the watchman of the game industry, is probably more important now on reporters like yourself. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how the gaming industry is going and how we can work better with the press.
Well, I mean, obviously there's going to be some hesitation from bigger companies to work directly with the press, especially if they are pushing for some of these stories that are about the nastier side of the industry, like you were saying with the Me Too movement and the crunch time. But you are right that it is something that we need to keep our eyes on, and it is very much up to journalists to be able to get it to a wider audience. If there is something going on that is not fair to the developers or is harmful to either it's the developers or other workers or even the gamers themselves, there can be people talking about it on social media, or there can be rumors going on message boards or elsewhere, but the only people that are really seen as an authority besides the developers themselves would be the media. And I feel like one of the reasons that because it's not like these things hadn't been happening before it all came to light. This is the kind of stuff that has been going on behind the scenes for most likely years in many places where nobody even mentioned it. And so the big question is, why is it that it came about now, and how did it come about now? And I think that there's a few things that bring that up. And part of it is journalists being more willing to look at that darker side. Especially when it comes to journalism in games, oftentimes the main focus is about, the games. It's like, oh, there's this new game coming out, or there's a new feature, and it kind of pushes the human side of it to the background. And the fact that, to be cynical about it, journalism is always going to be about getting people's attention. And previously, I think that there was an idea that people just didn't care about what was going on beyond the scenes, that the main reason that they were going to journalism outlets was to know about the product, know about the cool new game. And that's certainly one of the big reasons they do it. But it was easy for us to forget that everyone cares about people. And our audience, no matter who is out there does care about the people behind the games they make. They want the people who are making their games to not be burned out. They don't want the big names or the creative voices behind the industry to be suffering, because people genuinely care about people. But that's not the main reason that it hasn't happened. The main reason it hadn't happened is, I think, because nobody actually believed that, like in the industry, that there would be, well, here, let me back up a little bit. For journalists to cover a story about something big like this, something big like what was going on at Ubisoft or the major issues with crunch time, it needs to be more than just one person telling them about it. Right. It needs to be something, it needs to be something that the journalist can corroborate, the journalist can find more evidence on than just a single person with a rumor, especially if it's a big company, because the last thing you want to do is, well, one, needlessly anger a big company over something that isn't actually happening, or two, say something that might draw legal attention to you from someone who honestly has deeper pocketbooks. So as much as ideally that would not be a concern because you want to bring the truth out there, you need to make sure that what you're bringing out there is actually the truth. Because can you imagine if there had been all these outlets talking about what was going on at Ubisoft, and then it turned out there was actually nothing to it. Now, obviously, that's not what happened. You don't fire higher-ups like that over nothing happening. But if that is what had come out, there would no doubt be lawsuits from Ubisoft to the journalism outlets. So, and that's not to say that the journalists who hear these stories don't trust the people who are telling it to them. But the main phrase in journalism is trust but verify. You're hearing somebody tell you something that happened. You believe that, yes, this is what's happening, but you know that to be able to write a story about this and not face repercussions, you need to make sure that at very least there are multiple sources telling you this and that you're doing some background work. So I have no doubt that for years and years there have been the occasional person who mentioned to one outlet or another that there's something bad going on behind the scenes. But I mean, everyone else is probably, like, who was working there was probably a little bit afraid to say anything and didn't want to come out because, I mean, that could be their jobs on the line if they are bad-mouthing their executives.
It could be beyond the jobs. It can be, a career ender for you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you get blacklisted, but like no one will pick someone up if they are thought to be some troublemaker, even if they are completely in the right, if they're completely telling the truth, if it's just them talking about it, and this is the sad thing, it is very easy for people in position of power to make someone look bad, even if they're the victim. I mean, that's something that's extremely easy for them to do, and so sorry, I trip over myself a lot. And so nobody wants to do it. But the reason that it all came out at once is because people started to realize with the Me Too movement coming around that it's not just them, that they're not crazy and just imagining it, which I have no doubt there's some people who thought that up until everyone else started coming out. And so more people were willing to reach out to the media or speak out on social media or provide sources that allow a story to be written, because you can't just, as much as I wish it were possible to write a story based on just what one person who is anonymous says about a company, which is no doubt true. I mean, there's examples of people calling the local news station that I work for about stuff that's going on at local businesses or casinos that I would love to be able to do a story on, but all we're getting is, the occasional person who says, this is going on, it's really bad. No, I'm not gonna tell you my name, just you look into it. And we'd love to look into it, but there's nothing to look into. I mean, you can call a local casino and say, hey, we've heard rumors that you guys are suppressing the numbers of such and such, and they're not going to say, yes, oh yeah, we're totally doing this. So we need sources, whether it's an occasional person who's willing to speak out and put their name on it, or enough anonymous sources that we can corroborate back and forth and ask around. But that's what we need. We need to be able to write a story. At very least, we need to be able to prove in court that we have done due diligence to make sure that we're not just spreading rumors that have nothing to do with anything. I mean, a good example of something that's going on right now in Las Vegas, I don't know, there's a blog, I think was it Vitally Vegas? I think that's it, that reported a rumor about the Sahara completely planning to close its doors completely permanently due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And it was a story that made it very clear that it's just a rumor that's going around, but didn't say any sources or anything like that. And they ended up getting sued by the Sahara. Sure. And I have no idea what's actually going on behind the scenes of the Sahara, but the sources that he had, if they reached out to News 3, I have no doubt that we'd ask about it, and then we'd hear back something saying, no, we currently have no plans. So regardless of whether it's true, we'd just say, well, I mean, we can't really report on this unless it's people willing to talk on the record, say that this is what's actually going on. Now, I have no idea what is actually going on back there, but it's the due diligence that's needed, the ability to verify something. And if we can't get it verified from the company itself, which in terms of controversial stuff, they're obviously not going to specifically verify it unless they've got some really strong reason to do it, such as a major social media push or something else. So if we can't get the company to verify it, we need some very convincing either evidence, whether it's screenshots or
photographs,
photographs, recordings, something that shows what's going on, or enough people coming out to talk about it. And well, one thing, and I wish this wasn't true, but anytime a story comes out that's a big story, but is always about anonymous sources, and the other side denies it, I mean, what's the one thing that they say? It's like, yeah, you can't trust anonymous sources.
Right.
And, I mean, that's not as true as people would like to say, but there is some truth to that, because it's easier to, like, if for whatever reason you've want to badmouth someone for something that's not true, it's easier to do it when you're anonymous than if you're sticking your neck out about it. But anonymous sources, very often, they're only anonymous because they know it's their neck. That if they go out there and they don't get the amount of support that they're hoping they'll get, which happens more often than I'd like to admit, like someone sticks their neck out and it gets known, and then the story doesn't pick up. I mean, it gets reported somewhere, but nobody there's not some big movement behind it. Then it's, well, that person's now untouchable, and yeah, they did the right thing. And what did it get them? All it did was it gets them blacklisted.
Right.
So to prevent stuff like that from happening, it needs to be more. I guess "needs to be" isn't the right word. It's better the more people who are willing to talk about it. If it's multiple anonymous sources, that, like, to the point where it's pretty dang convincing, then there's a chance we'll step out and write about it, even if nobody's willing to put their actual neck on the line. If there's people who are willing to put their name on it, put their face on a controversial story about someone in power, then we're more willing to put it out there. And not only is that because it makes it more likely to be, have something substantial to it. I mean, someone putting their face on a bold claim is a lot better than someone hiding and saying a bold claim in the eyes of the public and the eyes of the court. But it's not only that, it's also, and I hate to say this because a whole lot of this stuff is legal reasons.
Sure.
But legally, if we are putting someone saying it, if we say this person said it as opposed to saying sources say this, then, I mean, that gives the journalism outlets a bit of legal protection also. It's not, we're reporting that this might be happening. It's we're reporting that this figure who was working here said this thing. I mean, to put an extreme example on it, let's say that we've got, I don't know, some sort of big political figure who happens to say extremely controversial and often inaccurate statements. Let's just have that hypothetical. Now, if reporting what that person says is news because they're a big person in the country or a big person in an industry or someone with knowledge of the industry, reporting what that person says is news. Now, if this same person were to anonymously say something, and just reporting that report without sticking the person's name on it is not necessarily news unless you're able to find some evidence about it. So there's two different ways to report a story about something, and it's either this person is saying it, or this is a rumor, or this is things that we're hearing and we're looking into it. And one is safer than the other. Putting somebody else's face on something is safer. It's safer to say that this developer or this person who works somewhere is saying this, because that is true. That is undoubtedly true, because it's like, yeah, here he is right here. He's saying it. That is the truth. The journalists are not lying, no matter how true what they're saying is. But if we're just reporting on something without someone's face on it, then it's us deciding that this is a subject that's worth reporting on without anyone's name tied to it, without any official source or official event happening that we're tying it to. So it's giving credence to something on its own. And there are times when journalists will do that because they see strong enough evidence that it is a thing that's going on. But we are less likely to do that than we are to report what someone's saying publicly. I hope that makes sense. Because
it does. It absolutely does. Let me also just add to that. As you know, I do a lot of interviews. I have a pretty broad media presence. That's something that that I kind of cultivate. In all the years that I have been doing that, I wish that I could say that all the stories have been positive. They haven't all been positive. In fact, probably the one that was most negative is the one that was most widely circulated. That said, I have never ever been misquoted by journalists in the entire time, and this spans back my career prior to being in gaming. I've never been misquoted. Everything has been accurate. Whether I felt that the context was being portrayed properly or not, now we're kind of slicing that thin. But there's never been anything that was inaccurate. And again, the story that I'm talking about, when we had to redo the System Shock team a number of years ago. So the original impetus for that came from a report that was made from and I'm gonna kind of hit these words: a disgruntled former employee. There is no antonym for disgruntled, but I try to keep all my employees gruntled as much as possible. That said, what was said, the context of it was up to debate, but what in fact had happened was accurately reported, and we had to make the best of it. And it's another story about that, but when we were able to get back on track, and it wasn't long afterwards, unfortunately, GDC was still a thing then. So I got the opportunity to meet with some members of the press face to face at that time. The press was welcoming. They were not out to stab me in the back or to throw dirt or whatever the expression is. So my experience with the media in general has been very positive. More to the point of talking about positivity, it has been 100% accurate. There was one thing that you omitted in talking about the context, and it's less true now for what you're doing than it was a number of years ago. But one of the other big factors and why stories weren't reported was sponsorship. So if you go back to print media lived and died by the advertising that it sold. So you have a client that is taking, a 2-page, full pages on both spread in your magazine every month. Well, a story comes in about them. Perhaps you don't pursue it with the same diligence as somebody that doesn't advertise with you. The other part that's even more difficult is whose money do you accept? The capitalist in me says everyone's. But if you ask GameSpot today, that accepted and ran, wasn't even necessarily advertising. It was one of those, hybrid infomercial things from the National Guard. That did not work out so well for them today. I believe that it was basically an hour after the story went out. It was a review of their Gamescom stuff done by a member of the National Guard and sponsored by the National Guard. Did they break some unwritten code? Well, they probably did. But if I had to explain it to someone, I would have a hard time doing that.
It's funny that you should mention the sponsored content stuff, because I don't know if I should be mentioning this, but there had been some issues even with the big media group that I work for locally, with not, like, some stations not mentioning that they're doing a story about a company that has been sponsoring them in the past. And that's actually something that, at very least, as far as broadcast goes, you need to do. You need to make it clear that whether people that you're talking to or talking about are in fact a sponsor. And that's something that is getting more and more important these days, because people want to make sure that the news that they're talking to is in fact trustworthy. This isn't just a games thing, but that is. And another thing, I've actually had experience in the past for a different company I was working for, like, years and years ago, telling me to make sure not to cover a certain story because it would anger a sponsor. And it put a really bad taste in my mouth. But I was new in the industry. Sure. I didn't want to rock the boat, so I just kind of agreed, and also didn't tell my other people not to put the story up. So the AP story ended up on the site anyway, but no fallout.
Right. No, and again, these issues aren't always so clear cut. You have two stories, one about a cat in the tree, and the other one about company A, sexually harassing an executive at company A, sexually harassing their employees, and you look at the two stories; they're clearly not of equal weight. But company A really helps keep your radio station, your podcast, your whatever afloat, and so you get into things now. We're talking about the modern media today, and so the electronic portion of it. First of all, if you're not printing a magazine, then the need to sell print ads to pay for that printing cycle is less, right? Your overhead is less.
That is very true.
So there's that part. There's that part of it. But the information that we all consume comes from a variety of different sources, and I think that they have different weights. So famously, I'm not telling tales out of class, but famously, Warner Brothers is known that when they give you a code for a game to be reviewed on YouTube, that one of the requirements is that you do not give a negative review and that you do not report bugs. Of course, I didn't mean to say bugs. I meant undocumented features.
Yeah.
that we put in the game. But that joke aside, that um, I don't believe that any media outlet, certainly none of the major ones, would accept a deal like that. But if you're a one-person streamer whose income, is dependent on this one review, this one review can determine your ability to pay rent this month or not, right?
Yeah.
That's a pretty hard call to make. Um,
I mean,
so,
that's, go ahead. Go ahead.
so I mentioned that you had also said, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but that clickbait is an important part of the media today.
Well, yeah, I mean, clickbait is the word for it. I mean, I'm sure if you actually talk to anyone in charge of any of the websites, they'd probably find some other way of phrasing it. But the idea is to make sure that what you're putting out there is something that grabs attention. I mean, people are not consuming media the same way that they would consume a print magazine back in the day. You open up your old copy of EGM and you'll just read what's there. It doesn't matter how flashy the headlines of each individual story are. I mean, obviously the cover, they'll try to make it as attractive as possible, but the headlines of the stories don't matter as much because, I mean, you
already bought the magazine.
You already bought the magazine. But in an environment like where you're sharing all of your stories on Facebook, I mean, what the algorithm chooses to share to people, or what people choose to click on and share to other people, almost entirely depends on what the headline is and what the photo are. The content of the story could be absolutely amazing, but if it's got a headline that doesn't draw people's attention, then it's not going to spread. It's not going to be a successful story. I think some of the work that I do is for The Gamer. I've been a little lax on actually working for them lately because of some personal things happening because of the pandemic. But I think there's two examples of stories that I've written.
Wait a minute. Let me cut you off for a second. How many kids do you have?
3 kids.
And you're home with your wife and your 3 kids. I am going to give you a get out of jail free for any sins of omission or commission you may have occurred. If you're managing that, bless you, and we'll get you back on track with The Gamer.
I do appreciate that. But there was 2 stories that I did with The Gamer that I both personally feel like they're some of the better stories that I did. One of them was headlined something along the lines of it was about the Fallout 76 paid pass, and the headline was the Fallout 76 paid pass costs more than the Xbox. She's with Xbox Game Pass. Here's what you get for it, and it's a decent title. I've got some clicks. But I feel like the quality of that, and I don't usually talk about how good my stories are, but I was actually felt like I was a bit on a roll because I was absolutely lambasting them in really weird ways. Because I mean, it's an expensive pass, and compared to what you got for the Xbox Game Pass, in which you have literally all the full Fallout games there for you. It kind of seemed a bit ridiculous.
Yep.
And I enjoyed writing the story. The editor said that it was the funniest thing that they read all week. And, it did okay. The other story that I wrote, which I feel like wasn't as high quality, but was pretty decent, was the headline for that one was truck carrying dice crashes. Let me start over. Truck carrying dice spills load, does 60,000 D6 damage to freeway. And I mean, it's a little. I mean, obviously the truth of that is it didn't damage the freeway at all. But I mean, that took off several times. Like there was a time when, it did tens of thousands of views at first, and then it was you know, there was a lull in it, and then someone else discovered it and started sharing it, and it got big again. And there's just the headline. It wasn't that great of a story. I mean, I put a few jokes in it. It was a funny story, but it. I think I said in it that it was the biggest dice roll since Brexit, but but it was the headline that did it, and that's the thing. The quality of the story matters some, but it doesn't matter nearly as much as far as getting people's attention as the headline does. And I wish that weren't the case. I wish that the quality of writing would stand on its own. But I mean, I feel like there's only one article that I've done where the quality of writing is mainly what drew people's attention. That's because it was for a bit of a niche thing that people were just glad someone gave it that much attention for. It was a story that I did for EGM about Pets Cop, if you're familiar with that.
No, but I may well be Googling it right after this this session.
Yeah, it's a YouTube series that is about it's a fake series about someone discovering this unreleased PlayStation 1 game and showing gameplay of it. It's kind of like a creepypasta type thing, but it drew a lot of attention. And the fact that somebody had written, I think it was like a 3,000, 4,000 word article about it, people really liked it and they shared it. And I actually managed to get the person who made it, I managed to interview him. I was the only person who did that. So people enjoyed the fact that it had content that they were all seeking out. They wanted to know what the person who made this was thinking, what certain things mean, et cetera, et cetera. And so that on its own drew people's attention, but usually the only thing that draws people's attention is the headline, or whether it's about, I mean...
Let me make one correction on there. One of the other things that draws people's attention, and I really did want to talk about it for today's news, is the picture. And you as the writer don't get to choose the picture that goes with it, right? Or at least...
Depends on the publication, but usually no.
And depends on the picture, whether it's a picture of the person that you're interviewing or this was removed within an hour. Let me preface this because I want to make sure that I do maintain great relations with the press. But I've written to Kotaku, United States recently on several occasions, to Stephen Totillo and to Ethan Gash over there. Telling them that how much I appreciate some of their investigative journalism. When Jason Shearer left to go over to Bloomberg, I was concerned that we would lose those voices in the gaming community. They have not missed a beat. They've stepped up, and Jason, of course, is continuing to do his investigative work over at Bloomberg. That's my homage to the press. But here's the thing that happened today: Kotaku UK. Not the American branch, but Kotaku in the UK, did a story about the government of Germany creating a fund to promote game development in Germany, which I think most people, the general public, would regard as a good thing, right? The government steps up. They're helping an industry grow. They recognize that game development is something that can be done during this pandemic, and they're supporting that. The picture that accompanied it was from, I want to say, Wolfenstein Youngblood.
Okay.
It showed a World War II German soldier with a swastika on his arm.
Oh, boy.
To start with, that game was not developed in Germany. Mm-hmm. We have an American company and a French studio, if it's an Arcane game, doing that work. Otherwise Machine Games is also not a German company. So the relevance, or of that picture, but the connotation, the spin that it put on this otherwise benign story, was just terrible. Now, I will say again, I'm going to guess that social media got on them within an hour or less. That had been changed, and the picture was appropriate. But that kind of bubbled up. Now, understanding it from a business point of view, while I'm not defending who made the decision, I have no idea who made the decision over there. I wouldn't know them if we were stuck in the elevator together. So, but I can understand the business decision from some editor going, well, this story is kind of cool, but nobody's going to read it outside of the gaming industry, and particularly outside of the German gaming industry. So let me put this picture in that's really going to get everybody's attention. If you know the laws in Germany, there is no company in Germany that could make a game that featured a swastika as part of their.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was completely inappropriate, and it was a clickbait thing. That said, if we're going, I mean, the companies that own media outlets are in it to make money.
That's true. I mean, there are probably some small independent sites that could care less whether or not they make money, but I'm guessing most of even those are hoping to have a positive income. I mean, the goal of putting media out there ultimately, no matter how pure a writer's intentions is, no matter how much we love the industry or want to help people in the industry, it all is ultimately to get people's attention, to get them there, to either, well, it's either the advertisement that's there, or one thing that Escapist, who I do a lot of articles for, is doing right now is they've actually got a paid content. They're doing a sort of subscription service. We'll see whether or not it works out, but I think it's a great idea.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, you're right. Money is the bottom line. Money is why any industry exists, with exceptions. There are always exceptions, and I applaud anyone who is in any industry for something besides the money. It's something that, I mean,
let me just say this. Some of the people who do not need any more money and control print media are the ones that I fear the most. And I don't even need to talk about contemporaries, right? I mentioned that I'm a big fan of this show, The Alienist. One of the characters in season 2 is William Randolph Hearst, right? I mean, he already. I mean, the opulence when they show a couple of parties at his house. That this is the age of the robber barons and the opulence. In the meantime, this is the guy that whether it's apocryphal or not is quoted as saying, "You get me the pictures, and I'll get you the war."
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
Right. So, and again, I just want to, I'm not bringing out these archaic political or historical references. It's always been this way. We were looking at clicks before there were clicks, right? How many copies of the paper do you sell, and what's the headline today, right?
That's true. That's true. And the thing is, the problem, I mean, obviously that on its own is bad, but it has a ripple effect. Like when a company does something like put an inappropriate image on just to gain attention, even though it has nothing to do with the story, or have a headline that really skews it. I mean, it makes it so that that people assume that every single headline is done specifically for that reason. So you've got a headline that really exaggerates something that happened. Then it means that when someone sees a headline that's like a really good investigative piece, they assume it's the same thing, that it's clickbait, that it's trying to get attention. And I mean, and while I do say that, yes, ultimately every single media company is trying to make money, that does not mean that every single writer or every single journalist or every single content creator is in it for the same thing. I mean, I'd say most of the content creators are doing it, especially in the games industry, for games journalism. Most are doing it out of a love for the industry. I mean, games journalism is not one of the better paid journalisms out there. I mean, because everybody wants to be in it. You don't get a ton of money for writing an article, and there are some outlets that give you bonuses for how many views it gets, or pay you entirely based on how many views it gets. But even then, the people, like, the amount that it pays compared to other types of journalism, like if you were able to somehow get into journalism about Bitcoin or journalism about finance or something like that, the amount that gaming journalism pays is a pittance. And that's not to say that those people are rich in those other places, but it is to say that they do get more for what they're writing. So So don't assume that a writer is in it just for the money, even though every single company, no matter which media conglomerate in what industry is in it for the money. The writers, especially for games journalism, are almost exclusively there because they love video games and they want to write about video games, and it gives them joy to be writing about video games, even if it's something that's critical of a game or critical of a company. They wouldn't be there in the first place if they didn't love the industry. I mean, it's not like you're going to have a Jack Thompson writing for Kotaku or anything like that. At
least not yet, right? But yeah,
no,
yeah.
That's true. The really interesting. I don't know if you saw. I think it was what was the company? There was actually an article a few years ago that interviewed Jack Thompson. Guess what he's doing now? He's fighting for civil rights for prisoners. Like, he's teaching them the law. Like, that sounds like a pretty noble thing to be doing. And it just, if you grew up like me, reading games journalism or caring more about games than anything, you probably got this completely demonized idea of who Jack Thompson is. But I mean, he is a person who really believed something and really believed that what he was doing was to help people. I think I'm getting a little off track here, but I just think
but it's okay. I mean, that's part of the games industry, that we are all so passionate about what we're doing, and that's a double-edged sword. Let me take the other perspective. We've talked about journalism. Let's talk about some of the people that you would report. That terrible guy that was forcing his developers to sleep in the office. Well, if you really look at a lot of the companies, you would find that the executive, that the owner of the company, was spending as much time as his employees did in crunch. I mean, I know this to be the case. So I've worked for people like that, ironically, we had a developer join Night Dive, and Night Dive, as you know, is completely distributed. We always have been. So this developer asked in the development channel, says, "Hey, I've got that report that Larry asked for." Now, this is the guy's first week at work, and he's reporting to me. He says, "Scott, I've got that report that Larry asked for. How should I get it over to him?" And one of the other developers said, "Oh, Larry's always online." It happened that it was 3 o'clock in the morning East Coast time, which was where I was living, and so I just happened to be looking at my phone. I'm stressing that just happened to be looking at my phone, because I typed back and saying, "No, I'm not. I'm not always online." Yeah. But there are a lot of us that went out to make great games. That doesn't mean that we don't need checks and balances, because we're as committed, and we can have the same myopia, the same blindness that both the developers and our fans get. I will tell you the stories of journalists chasing that story that nobody wanted them to do, but that they felt passionate about. I mean, I grew up with my image of Woodward and Bernstein. There's another thing that has come up, which is believability, and that's kind of the core of some of the things that we've talked about, Philip. When people read things online, as more media outlets shift to being primarily online, I don't think it has the same gravitas as reading it in a print medium. I think we were more likely to believe it in a print medium. That said, we've come to the point where all things are equally true and all things are equally untrue. And that's not new, and nor is it a quality of just the internet. I recently did an interview with a wonderful young man about the civil rights movement. The title of the interview was "My Memories Are Your History," And one of the things that I spoke about was, with John Lewis's recent passing, was the crossing of the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And that, it's a great event. Everyone's seen the pictures of it. Everyone's seen the footage of the brave marchers and the police waiting on the other side with the dogs and the nightsticks. Everyone has seen that. Well, you know what? You wouldn't have seen that if it wasn't for one cameraman. All of that footage was covered by one cameraman who risked his own life in taking that footage. And if I recall the story correctly, the thing that was that made it so memorable was, it happened on a Sunday. He sent the cassette of the footage. I don't know exactly what it was recorded on. So it would have been 1960s technology. So it's probably 8mm tape. Sending that off to sorry, what
16mm film.
16mm film. So he took the tape and sent that by courier to NBC that actually interrupted the football coverage that night to show the pictures. And that was America. I mean, that was a changing point in the civil rights movement. It was a watershed moment, as they say. That said, no one was looking at those pictures and no one was looking at the TV coverage and saying, I don't believe that really happened.
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely, I don't know. I mean, I wasn't around in earlier eras, so I can't say for sure what the view of photos or journalism was back then. But I mean, one thing that I'm noticing these days is whether or not somebody believes a story is almost entirely based on whether or not they already believed it before the story was written, or before the video came out. And if what is being written or what is being shown is contrary to what they already believed, I mean, most of the time they'll either not even read the story because they think it's the lying media on trying to stir things up, or they'll try to think of some way that what they're reading or what they saw could be justified or could be explained away. And I feel like part of that simply comes from the fact that there are more options than ever as far as what you read, what you watch, and you will always be able to find someone that's telling you exactly what you want to hear. Yeah. And that there's a danger in that because, and I don't doubt that a lot of those places are 100% genuine, though there's probably plenty of others that are doing it for cynical reasons. They know that this isn't what an audience wants to hear, so that they're going to say it. But the thing is, the result is you can live in whatever reality you want to. You can live in a reality where the protests in
Kenosha
are 100% peaceful, nothing bad happens, and it was completely reasonable for them to try to cut off the capital area from police entering whatsoever, and the fact that there was a higher murder rate is completely incidental during those few weeks that happened. Or you can live in a reality where the protests in Portland are for no reason whatsoever, and there's no reason to be mad about what's happening with police, and that they're all just a bunch of violent socialist communists who are trying to radicalize the entire country and take away capitalism forever. You can live in either of those worlds if you want to. You can just choose which media you want to consume. And I mean, I hope me saying this, you realize that I don't feel like either of those is what is reality. I mean, there's obviously some nuance to what's going on, but you don't have to accept the nuance anymore. Right. In the current world, you can just find exactly what you want to hear, and it confirms to you things so much that anything that goes against it, you feel like you don't even need to listen to it because you've seen in your mind enough to know that everything else is a lie. And I'm not quite sure what the solution to that is.
So just one correction. When you were talking about the socialist communists, you left out the word godless. We always have to refer to them as godless socialist communists.
I always forget that.
That's an
Yeah.
important one. I was really lucky, and this is part of my my old age. I was born at the transition when the torch was passed from Edward R. Murrow to Walter Cronkite.
Oh,
And when I was a kid, Walter Cronkite was the voice of God. Um, and Paul was saying that with Hearst that it was remember the Maine, and the term yellow journalism was being coined, and that's true. But the other side to it is Lyndon Baines Johnson once famously said upon listening to Walter Cronkite talk about the Vietnam War that he no longer believes the Vietnam War was winnable. LBJ famously said, if we've lost Walter Cronkite, we've lost the nation.
yeah,
And I don't think we have people quite like that. But I will say there are a lot of people in games journalism that I trust 100% of the time. There are a lot of publications in game journalism. Particularly, I've been lucky. I've gotten to know some of the editors. I will say Evan Lottie over at PC Gamer. I could name a whole bunch of people over there, but Evan as editor, Steve Totillo over at Kotaku are people that I trust 100%. One of the other things that's happened in this age, and again, it is not confined to only media, nor is it confined to the gaming industry, is we used to talk about two ways that companies can grow. You can either grow, vertically, selling, more, buying up your competitors, staying in that same space, but just increasing your presence there, or you can grow horizontally, and you can pick up companies that are not as directly related. And one of the things that I think about quite a bit is Humble Bundle's acquisition by IGN.
oh yeah,
They have been really, really good, and I'll say this. I'll say this 100% with no ulterior motive. I know the people there, but they have been really good at maintaining arm's length separation between the two companies. The problem that comes up is that Humble has expanded beyond just the bundles, but there's Humble Publishing.
yeah. I mean,
And
they're pretty much their own entire storefront now.
yeah, they're their own ecosystem, and that's fine. Um, the problem comes up with they're also being part of a media company.
Oh, I see. Because it creates a perverse incentive for IGN to give positive coverage or even coverage at all the stuff that is being sold on Humble Bundle, and that's always an issue. I mean, the more connections you've got, the more you really have to make sure that you're not betraying someone's trust. The more that
Yep.
you're and I mean, it's perfectly reasonable to think that I mean, just from an average person who doesn't know much and just loves, oh, there's IGN and they also own this company that sells games, it would be perfectly reasonable for the average person to assume that any coverage IGN does of some game that is available through Humble Bundle might be biased in its favor. I don't think IGN does that. Honestly, IGN has impressed me time and time again with some of their ethical choices. The one that stands out to me the most is their choice not to publish a scored review of, sheesh, what was that game? Of Death Stranding, because there was a requirement that there was some sort of requirement that Konami
Yeah.
had behind it. And they chose to just not publish the scored review because even though they probably would have reading it, they probably would have given it a perfectly fine review, they didn't feel comfortable bowing to that requirement. And I feel like there's a lot. I know that in certain corners of the internet, IGN gets a hard time because of, they rated a certain game this way, or there's a certain quote taken out of context, or even in context from a review that they did. But I think it's important to take a look at the choices that they've made and see that they are trying their best to be ethical, and even though they have every incentive not to be.
Well, I called out a couple of editors that I trust 100%, and I omitted one. I don't do a whole lot with IGN, but Dan Stapleton over at IGN is also one of the people that I have a 100% degree of confidence in. If Dan says that it's the case, then I absolutely believe it.
Of course.
And there are a whole lot of good people in the industry. The other thing that's been a challenge for the industry, and that impacts the reporting, is aside from looking to make money, and there being competition from YouTubers, from Twitch streamers, from all the variety of other people. I mean, what do you want to see? Do you want to read a print review, or do you want to see somebody playing the game for 2 hours?
No.
There's all of that, but the other thing, and these aren't decisions that either reporters or editors get to make, but how you handle monetization, how you handle the paywall. I still read a fair amount of the New York Times. Every time I click on my third article in a two quick succession, the New York Times pops up this little message that says, "I see you read a lot of stuff on the internet. Certainly, you must want our paper delivered to your door." And actually, it's quite the other side. I would gladly cut you a check now if you'd stop asking me if I want your paper delivered to my door. Especially not on Sunday. But that said, the issue of how we began by saying that as a gaming industry executive, although for small company executive, I rely on you guys to tell me what's happening, and I rely on you guys to keep me honest and human in my interactions. That said, I want to see you guys get paid. I want to see you guys continue to flourish and to some extent to prosper. And I don't really have a great solution. We talked a little bit about IGN buying Humble, and that's an interesting story. And I think most people would go, well, okay, what's the big deal? And Humble is a company that has a well-deserved, excellent reputation. We've participated in 3 charity bundles with them so far in 2020, and if they called me up and asked again, we would certainly step up for a 4th time this year. We support them 100%. All of that's good. How would we feel about? I'm not sure who the largest media outlet is today. Is it Polygon? Is it PC Gamer? I don't know who.
I honestly don't know which one. I just realized it's getting dark in here, and you probably are just seeing my silhouette right now. I should probably turn on a light, so I'll be right back. But
sure. No. We were actually just assuming that you were doing that to maintain anonymity.
Yeah, I'm just cut off the very beginning of the entire talk, and I think we're good.
So what I was going to say is a hypothetical. Let's say Polygon is the big boy on the block. How would we feel if Epic bought them?
Yeah, I mean that would definitely be something that should set off alarm bells. I mean, people would be thinking that, well, obviously everything that Polygon is writing now will have a pro-Epic bent, and I don't know to what degree that would happen. I mean, obviously it depends on how hands-on Epic would become, but
sure.
But it is something that anyone should keep their eyes on. I mean, you need, as much as journalists exist to or no Steam reviews on Polygon until 1 year after review. Oh, sorry, I was reading the text thing. But as much as journalists ideally exist to hold companies accountable, the public does need to hold journalists accountable to make sure that what they're doing is actual journalism, make sure that they are not committing ethical breaches themselves. Of course, the flip side of that is that people, if a journalism outlet is saying something that someone doesn't want to hear, it's probably easy for them to start saying things that make the company look bad, even if they're not true. So that's got to be a balance there. Because I mean, you say that you trust the editor at Kotaku more than anything, but there's plenty of people who are absolutely livid about Kotaku because of the amount of attention that they give to the negative side of the gaming industry. And those people will find anything to make Kotaku look bad. Some of it may be justified, but I'm guessing most of it isn't. I haven't looked that much into it. And so it's a strange balance that I don't know how you can actually balance the public keeping journalists honest with certain parts of the public wanting to hurt the people who bring light to things that they don't want brought light to. And I'm not quite sure what the answer is.
So that's the challenge. And we talk about public trust, but the word trust can have two meanings, right? There's the trust you extend to somebody, or you create a trust to manage the industry. And I don't think we want to see, we don't want to see journalist companies acquired. We don't want to see them being, semi-governmental units.
Oh no, the last thing you want is a state-run news station.
Well, I won't make any political comments about that, but I'm sure that idea is floating around. America has been relatively free of that, but not every country has been.
That is true.
So there's always that aspect of it. But the problem is that if we say that media outlets, and I'm using that term very broadly, if we say that media outlets, if we say it's important for them to maintain their independence, well, they have bills to pay. Even if they're not running for a profit, even if they're running to try to maintain that break-even point, that implies a certain bias, and that's where you get the clickbait stories. That's where you get the picture that doesn't go with the benign story about Germany today. And these are issues that we're certainly not going to solve, but that people in games, certainly our fans, should think about. Philip, it's kind of running late. I am going to ask you if you have any parting thoughts that you want to share. We've covered a lot of ground.
Well, I suppose I've just got a few things, because I know that one thing that a lot of people in the games industry, especially independent developers, would be wondering about is what it is that would get their specific games covered, what it is that would, how it is that you can bring attention to their games. And so I think that there's a few things to know about. I mean, obviously, if you got a PR firm, they'll cover a lot of that. But it's always good if you've got a. All right, I had something in my mind, and then we had this hour-and-a-half conversation that.
No. I'll tell you how I have managed it, and you feel free to critique and give me pointers. When I prepare a media kit, and we have a PR company, but 9 times out of 10, I give them the media kit. So my thinking is to always have the least friction to make it as easy on the reporters as I can. So I have a written cover page that highlights the game name, highlights the key features, tells the backstory of the game. I give them access to the game itself. Then I have another folder with a variety of screenshots, and I will often have a video that is longer than I expect any media outlet to cover. So maybe a 40 or 50-minute gameplay video. And here's why I do that. Very often they'll make their own videos, but if they're relying on the one that I send them, that same video can be sliced up by a variety of media outlets and reused without being repetitious.
And that is, I mean, all of that is exactly correct. You want to be able to make it as easy on the media themselves to write your story, then they're more likely to write it. But of course, with your company, you have the benefit of you're working with franchises that people are already familiar with. Yep. So they're going to want to cover what's going on with System Shock, or the fact that you've brought back an old game that was a beloved part of someone's childhood. And a lot of independent developers don't have that benefit. I mean, and I think that there's one of the big things that people want to know is, how can I take my game, which I think is a great game, and get somebody's attention? And you mentioned a few things that are good. I mean, offering a preview build, sending it out to them to play, that will make them more likely to do it, because a lot of places, I know Escapist loves doing previews if they've got a preview build. They also, if they're the type of place that does interviews, they love being reached out to be able to talk to somebody. But you also need a hook that makes your game interesting. You need to be able to say quickly and make it clear why it is that your game is something that's different from any other indie game out there, why it is that your game is something that will draw people's attention. And without that, I mean, it's just a piece of sand on the beach. It could be anyone that gets picked up, unless it's already being picked up on social media for something. I mean, we will cover what it is that's already popular, because again, we want to gain people's attention. But if you're trying to get the media's attention for something that isn't already popular, that isn't already well known, you need to show them what it is about your game that draws attention, what it is that will turn everybody else's head when they write the article. So I think one of the important things in development as a indie game developer, I say this as someone who has, barely dabbled in it and failed to create a single level, but I think that it's important to keep that in mind when you're designing your game, to try to make sure that there's something that whether it's social media or streamers or a writer for a journalism outlet can latch onto as a reason to write the article.
Yeah, it's a great point. That unique quality is also something that you should not expect the reporters to discover on their own. It is something that you should highlight in your media guide.
That's correct. And also, and another great thing is make sure that you do have what you're talking about, the media guide, and make sure that you push it out to the media outlets that are out there. Now, the bigger media outlets, it'll be harder to get them to talk about your game, because they're covering all the big stuff that they can. But there's a lot of outlets. I mean, I think outlets like The Gamer and Screen Rant and Game Rant and Twinfinite, they are designed on creating a whole lot more articles than something like The Escapist. And they're more likely to pick something up that you send them, simply because they create more content in general. So if they see something like about your game that looks interesting, they're more likely to do a quick 300-word write-up about it, or assign it to one of their reporters than if you were to send the same thing to Polygon. I mean, for Polygon or for Escapist or for anyone else, for any of the bigger ones to pick it up, you have to really draw their attention. And that's not to say you shouldn't bother sending it to them, but I feel like you also need to take a look at what the smaller outlets are, what the ones that do more content are. And so, I've got a number from a question from Grover here. There's a lot of big games constantly coming out and constantly being covered. When would you think would be a good window to talk to a reporter about an indie game? Well, I can only say from the experience of the places that I've worked, but I do know that Escapist actually has a indie game showcase that they regularly do. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head when it is that they do it, but it's worth reaching out to them around the time that they do that. I'd have to look that up, and I could send that information to Larry if he wants to spread that around.
Sure thing.
And I know that there's times where there is a lull in the games that are coming out. So I think that how long should I wait for the hype to die down after a major release? I mean, that depends on how much attention the release itself gets, but I'd say, I mean, since there's so many coming out, it's hard to do a longer number, but I'd say at least wait a week or 2 weeks before you try pushing out your game. But there's also lulls in the amount of when things are, when big releases happen. So in, say, September, October, like a decent distance before the holiday season, there's going to be less huge releases. So that's a decent time to get yourself get attention. And then there's also like February, like after the holiday season. These are times when big publishers are less likely to release something. That's not to say that they won't. I mean, there's always exceptions, so I'm not going to put a hard and fast rule. But generally, the holiday season or before summer break, they're going to want to put their stuff out because that's when people are going to be buying things. So the times around those are the ones when people are more likely to be on the lookout for something smaller. And another thing, I'm glad that you actually brought that up because it reminded me of something. I work for a local TV station here in Las Vegas. And while the local TV audience certainly isn't the same as a video game audience, there is something to say about a local station caring about local people. And since this is a local branch, with all the developers being local, it is worth reaching out to the local media about what you're doing, about something that you're releasing. I know that the station I work for, News 3 here in Vegas, we oftentimes do one-on-one interviews with a local entrepreneur in town or someone who's creating something. And I mean, all you really have to do for that is reach out to one of the producers. Nicole Reynolds is the one for News 3 who sets up these interviews. And if you send it to him, if you send out just what you're doing and what you'd like to talk about, there's a good chance that they'll get you on one of the morning shows or the noon shows just to talk about what you're doing, because we need stuff to fill up the time. And another thing that's interesting, I mean, the weekend news audience isn't as big as the weekday news audience. So if you're holding an event or doing something on a weekend, you're a lot more likely to, and send a news release about that going on, you're a lot more likely to get the news to want to cover it, because due to the fact that fewer people watch the news on the weekend, fewer big companies announce things or do things on the weekend because they know that they'll get less eyes. But that leaves a gap there for the smaller people, for the little guy, to have themselves covered. Like, sure, you won't get the same ratings, but it's certainly more than them not covering you.
If the goal is to create an initial publicity that will hopefully allow you to build some momentum by saying, hey, this is an interview that I recently did, when you go to the next outlet, that's absolutely a great way to move forward, or to get your foot in the door.
Yes.
Anything else you wanted to cover?
No, I think that's about it, or at least everything that comes to mind now.
Great. We are again going to be putting this up on YouTube. I will certainly give you the link for that, and I'll be sharing this widely myself as well. Thank you again very much for your time.
Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity. You all have a good evening.